There is an assumption that almost everyone blindly accepts, that people who love cleaning are simply people who love cleanliness. They fold their clothes neatly. They arrange spice jars by height. They wipe every corner of the table, as if preparing to welcome an honored guest. Outsiders look at them and think, that's just how they are, neat, orderly, tidy. But the truth is never that simple, because if you are observant enough, you'll notice something. Cleaning is only the surface. Beneath it is a silent psychological battle. Some people don't clean because they want their home to look beautiful. They clean so they don't break. They clean as a ritual to stop themselves from falling into the deeper layers of emotional chaos. A person who is truly fine will not wipe the same table 3 times just because of a tiny water stain. A peaceful mind will not reorganize the entire closet at 2 a.m. just because it cannot fall asleep. And a heart without wounds will not suddenly rearrange the whole room after someone hurts them. Those seemingly small actions are, in reality, wordless cries for help, a kind of unconscious performance to convince themselves, I'm still okay. I can still control something. Ironically, people who love cleaning are often misunderstood as rigid, picky, overly meticulous. But if you go just a little deeper, you'll see. They are acting, but acting for themselves. A silent play in which they are simultaneously the actor, the audience, and the one desperately holding on to the last fragment of peace. Because sometimes, life becomes so chaotic that they no longer know where to begin. They cannot organize their emotions. They cannot clean up the painful memories. They cannot control the thoughts running wild in their mind. But they can rearrange a drawer. They can put every object back in its place. They can make the table shine under the warm yellow light. And so, they do. They clean. Not because the house is dirty, but because they cannot bear the mess inside themselves. That is why the more meticulously some people clean, the more unspoken things they carry in their hearts. Some people feel anxious the moment they see a messy corner, not because they hate disorder, but because disorder reminds them of the unresolved chaos within. While others see a table that needs wiping, they see a fragment of their mind cracking open. While others see a chair out of place, they see a buried emotion waiting to be named. Do you see yourself in this? Have you ever wiped a table when you were sad, folded clothes when you were anxious, cleaned your room after being hurt by someone? Have you ever asked yourself, why am I cleaning so much? Am I wiping the table? Or wiping away the fear of losing control? Most of us never ask that question. We simply keep doing and reassure ourselves that we just like cleanliness. But deep in the lowest layers of the psyche, where fears curl up like small silent creatures, cleaning becomes a ritual of survival. A ritual that helps a person believe they can still move forward by tidying one small corner of the world when the rest of it is slipping out of their hands. And that is the truth very few dare to confront. Cleaning has never been just cleaning. It is how a person tries to hold on to themselves. There are things happening inside a person that no one on the outside ever sees. People assume that those who love cleaning are simply neat freaks, people who hate messiness, adore order, and keep everything tidy as if it were just a personality trait. But strangely, the more closely I look, the more I realize that behind that neatness lies a self that refuses to speak. It doesn't make noise, doesn't argue, doesn't demand to be understood. It simply stands there, utterly still, watching life rush past like a fast-moving current. Then whispers, if I don't hold on to something, I will be swept away. It is that very self that guides a person's hand toward the broom, folds the shirt, wipes the dust off the table. Not because they have free time, not because they care about perfection, but because they fear the swelling chaos inside their chest. There are days when a person's inner world is so jumbled that they don't know who to talk to, don't know where to begin, explaining things they themselves have not fully understood. And in moments like that, all they know how to do is quietly clean, as a way to breathe, as a way to stop themselves from falling apart. In truth, cleaning often has nothing to do with the house at all. It has to do with the feeling of slipping out of life's grip, when a single sentence makes their heart sink, when a glance knocks the ground out from under them, when an entire day feels like an endless battle. That silent self urges them to stand up, pick up a cloth, and do the only thing they can still control, rearrange one small corner of the world. Outsiders won't understand why you have to wipe the table for the third time. Why, when you're sad, you fold clothes. Why, when night comes and everyone else is asleep, you quietly straighten things, as if afraid of waking someone. But you understand, because every small movement carries the same message. I'm still here. I haven't collapsed. Some people clean as a silent cry for help, not raising their voice, but raising their hands, not crying in front of anyone, but wiping a kitchen counter that was already clean, not admitting they're exhausted, but aligning a bookshelf that was off by 0.5 centimeter. These are actions only those who've been through it can recognize soft tremors hidden beneath them. When life becomes too big, the self retreats into a very small space, a room, a corner of a table, a wardrobe, a space small enough that they can decide everything inside it. As long as they can make that place orderly, they can believe they haven't completely lost control. A tiny feeling, but sometimes the only thing keeping them from falling apart. And when the cloth is folded straight, they feel their heart tilt back into place just a little. When the chair is set exactly right, their thoughts feel a little less chaotic. When the window glass is wiped clean, something inside them brightens too. Not fully, just enough to take the next step into another day. When you think about it, cleaning is a silent conversation between a person and the weakest part of themselves. A conversation that never becomes words. You do not say, "I'm hurting." You just clean. You do not say, "I'm scared." You just reorganize the closet. You do not say, "Everything feels out of my control." You just wipe away a tiny speck of dust, and the silent self understands all of it. When you stand in a tidy room, others may only see objects placed neatly where they belong. But yourself knows, this is the only place you belong in this moment. This is the space where you can still decide what happens. This small corner is enough to remind you that the chaos outside hasn't swallowed you whole. And then you realize something gentle yet profound enough to make your heart soften. People who love cleaning are not people who love cleanliness. They are simply trying to reclaim the right to steer their own life in the quietest way possible. There is something interesting that most of us have experienced, yet very few ever pause long enough to truly observe it. It is that moment, right after you've gone through an argument, a disappointment, a heavy wave of stress, a wound shoved straight into your chest, and instead of sitting still to feel it, you stand up and begin to clean, wiping a streak of water, washing a glass, folding a shirt, adjusting a few objects as if they had just made some kind of mistake. No one asked you to do it. No one is watching you. No one knows why you're doing it. But you do it, almost unconsciously. And the strangest part is this, that action makes you calmer, not because the house becomes cleaner, but because your mind suddenly feels lighter, less chaotic, as if your emotions have begun to reorganize themselves. If we stop there, one might think this is just a random habit. But when we look beyond behavior and into the brain's mechanism, we begin to see a surprising truth. Every act of cleaning after an emotional blow is the work of a nervous system trying to protect you. The human brain is designed to detect danger, process stress, and return you to safety as quickly as possible. But emotions, especially the painful ones like fear, anxiety, anger, disappointment, abandonment, have no concrete shape for the brain to hold on to. They are vague, slippery, undefined, and because they cannot be grasped, they create a deep sense of unease. So, when the inside cannot be controlled, the brain searches for something that can be controlled. What is easiest to control? The body, actions, objects, space. Cleaning is the quickest, clearest, most concrete choice. A folded towel is a completed command. A glass placed neatly is a resolution. A clean tabletop is a small victory. These actions, small as they appear, activate the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for behavioral control, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Under stress, this region often becomes impaired, leaving us confused, panicked, and unable to decide what to do. But the moment you start reorganizing the table, the brain understands. There is still something I can control. And instantly, the nervous system lowers its alert level, cortisol drops, and your breathing deepens. That is why you feel lighter. It is not a coincidence that you clean when your mind is in knots. It is the brain's survival strategy. You clean because the emotion is too heavy for you to sit with. You clean because if you stayed still, everything inside would crash down on you like a wave with no shore. You clean because, while your inner world is spinning, you need one thing that does not spin, and the table becomes that thing. When you argue with someone, your first action might be slamming a door, suppressing a sigh, then touching a chair, pushing it closer to the table. Just a little, but you do it, because you need rhythm again. You need to show your body that you still control something, even if it's small. When someone hurts you, you might start washing dishes, not because dirty dishes bother you, but because you don't know how to handle the emotion, so you handle the dish first. Running water, slipping foam, the soft clinking sounds. All of it becomes a rhythm that soothes your nervous system. And when you're anxious about something that hasn't happened yet, you might start reorganizing a drawer, as if arranging small objects could help you arrange the fear pounding in your chest. This behavior has never been irrational. It is the language of the body, the language of the brain, the language of the part of you that has never been named. In psychology, this is called external regulation, regulating emotion through external action. The brain uses the physical world to reorganize the inner one. When the inside is in chaos, we tidy the outside. When the outside is calm, we fear less. The truth is, humans have never really cleaned their homes. They clean their emotions, clean their helplessness, clean their fear, clean the tightness that refuses to turn into words. The room is merely the mirror reflecting that process. Think back to the last time you cleaned when you were sad. In that moment, you weren't thinking about dust on the floor. You were thinking about keeping your hands busy so your heart wouldn't shatter. Science explains this clearly. When you complete a small task, the brain releases dopamine. When you see a tidy corner, the brain lowers its internal alarm and activates the safety network. When you create order, the brain interprets it as a reduction of threat. So cleaning during stress is not a sign of weakness. It is proof that your body is trying to save you, quietly, gracefully, in a way outsiders will never understand. And perhaps you once didn't understand yourself either, but today you do. It turns out your brain chose cleaning as the way to keep you alive through moments when you thought you were about to break. If you look long enough at the moment you begin tidying a space, you'll see that it is not merely a daily habit. It feels like an ancient reflex rising from within. A reflex the mind learned from the earliest days when humans first feared the dark and longed for a place to calm themselves. You do not clean because of dust. You clean because you are trying to soothe a part of your soul trembling from a life that has become too loud. Deep inside, whenever your emotions are pushed to the edge, an invisible part of you begins searching for a sense of control. But it is not a violent kind of control, not rebellion, not the flaring of ego. It is like a hand resting gently on your chest, whispering, "We still have mastery over something." And somehow, you believe that whisper. So you stand up, not to wipe away a stain, but to gather your breath again. You no longer touch the table. That image belongs to old storms. This time, you touch the windowsill, a curtain slightly off its place, books that are no longer aligned, a thin layer of dust on an old picture frame. These small actions feel as though you are stitching together fragments of your soul that were torn apart by a sudden shock. Each movement of your hand carries a quiet meaning. I haven't lost everything yet. Humans need a sense of control more than they realize. Not control over others, but control over at least one firm piece of the world, a piece that life cannot drag away as it pleases. And here, order begins to speak. The world outside you rarely has rules. People come and go at the most unexpected times. Memories refuse to stay in one place. Pain follows no sequence. Emotions do not wait their turn for you to process them one by one. Everything crashes into everything else like unannounced waves. But a bookshelf can be straight. A curtain can be adjusted. A picture frame can be balanced again. A floor can shine under the light. When you create order for these things, you are building a version of the world you can coexist with. A world with structure, with boundaries, with breath. You make them neat. And in a quiet way, you feel yourself becoming neat again too. And then something strange happens. Just one tidy corner of a room can make your heart drop down a beat, as if the order outside has slipped into the inside, and rearranged you from the deepest layer. No one sees it, but you feel it clearly. This is what safety feels like. A subtle form of safety that only those who have lived in inner chaos can understand. Not safety from danger, but safety from the darker chambers within your own mind. You do not clean for the house to look good. You clean so your heart still has a place to stand. You clean so your soul has a soft place to lean when life becomes too hard. And at this point, when all the pieces become clear, you realize something so profound, it feels almost dizzying. People do not tidy their rooms to make them clean. They tidy to preserve the last fragment of order life cannot steal. That is the moment of awareness that lifts you. You look back at yourself, the trembling hands still wanting to straighten the curtain, the exhausted nights still smoothing the fold of the blanket, the lonely days still adjusting the position of the lamp on the desk. It was never addicted to neatness, never perfectionism, never an attempt to impress anyone. It is simply the way you save yourself. A small ritual, yet stronger than all the comforting words others could ever offer. A form of self-love even you sometimes fail to recognize. If life outside is a storm, then every tidy corner you create is the anchor that keeps you from being swept away. And perhaps you are realizing now, slowly but unmistakably, that every time you touch your home, you are touching the most fragile part of yourself, the part that only wants to feel safe, to feel steady, to know that you still control at least one thing in the storm called life. There is a very strange moment that only happens when you clean on days when your heart is not at ease. You touch objects, rearrange a small corner, wipe away a thin layer of dust on the table, and suddenly, in a single breath, you realize you are not really cleaning the room. What you are trying to put back in order is yourself. This truth doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It comes like a small sob caught in your chest, slow, gentle, yet enough to make your whole body tremble. You stand in the room slowly, becoming tidy, and suddenly you see something you have never named. Every item placed back where it belongs is a piece of inner emotion being lifted out of its tangle. You think you are adjusting the chair, but in truth, you are trying to adjust something misaligned inside you. You think you are cleaning up the mess, but you are clearing away the silent obsessions that never turn into words. You think you are removing dust, but somewhere deep within, you are trying to wipe away the exhaustion glued tightly to your heart. That is when you understand. Every wipe is a strain of pain softening. Every object put back is a worry released. Every empty space created is a space for you to breathe. And that awareness makes you pause, because suddenly, all the quiet efforts you've carried for months, for years, begin to make sense. You are not difficult to understand. You are not too perfectionistic. You are not obsessed with cleanliness. You are surviving. You look at the room gradually growing brighter, and you realize you have never cleaned because the room was dirty. You cleaned because there was a dark corner inside you with nowhere to go. You cleaned because your heart was calling for help, yet your throat could not voice a single sound. You cleaned because it was the only way not to drown in what you could not control. And only when you recognize this, does the sadness appear in full. It does not erupt, it simply stands there, quietly, like an old friend you've always avoided. You suddenly feel a profound tenderness toward yourself. For the nights you silently rearranged every object, so you wouldn't have to confront the emptiness inside. For the tired resilience you carried, as if letting go would make your whole life collapse. This is the moment you hit emotional rock bottom, not to break, but to understand. To understand that you have been trying for too long, too quietly, too alone. And then, from the deepest place, a sentence rises. It turns out I'm not cleaning the house, I'm cleaning the heart. This realization doesn't require intelligence or knowledge. It requires honesty with yourself, courage to face the part of your soul you've always hidden inside tidy drawers. The willingness to listen closely enough to see that every object you place back in order is a part of you longing to be organized again. And the moment you admit this, a soft release spreads through you. Not the release of giving up, but the release of setting down what you can no longer keep carrying. You begin to understand. You do not have to be strong every second. You do not have to appear fine just because the room is clean. You do not have to force your heart to endure more simply because others believe you are steady. You only need to let yourself breathe. One breath is enough for the emotions to find their way. One small space is enough for you to sit down inside yourself. And then, healing arrives slowly, but genuinely. It does not come from the room. It comes from realizing you deserve peace, not because you are tidy, not because you are in control, but because you have lived too long with things no one else ever sees. Cleaning has never been a physical act. It is a journey back home, back to the pieces you once dropped, back to the emotions you once locked away, back to the self who endured too much without ever asking to be heard. And when you place the final object in its proper place, you will feel your heart settling into a safe corner to rest. Not fine, just no longer bracing itself. A small pause, a long exhale, a quiet touch on truth, so that from this point on, you know healing never begins with grand lessons. It begins the moment you realize, every time you clean, you are touching your own heart. There are moments when the room has gone quiet after a long session of cleaning, when you stand in that space and suddenly feel something strange. This neatness does not belong only to the room, it belongs to you. It rests somewhere in the rhythm of breath you've just rediscovered, in the way your eyes move around the space and suddenly see everything become light, like an early autumn morning. In that moment, you understand that order is not the goal. Order is a metaphor for your very existence. Perhaps you must walk through chaos to truly understand the weight of a peaceful moment. Perhaps you must endure countless unpredictable, uncontrollable events to finally see the value of a small corner you can shape with your own hands. When you put an object back in its place, the space does not simply change. You are changing alongside it. When you adjust the curtain so the light falls exactly the way you want, you are creating another kind of light inside your soul. A light that does not come from the sun, but from awakening. The awakening that life will never fully be in your hands, but you can always create order wherever you stand. And that is the essence of existentialism. Human beings cannot control the world. Human beings can only control their response to the world. The order you create in this room is the most beautiful response you can offer life. It is not an escape. It is not a denial of chaos. It is your way of whispering to yourself, I am still here. I still have a place to begin. In existential philosophy, they say humans are beings thrown into the world, thrown into events, fractures, and things that cannot be named. But when you tidy up, that is when you stop being thrown. That is when you choose a place to stand. That is when you say, I choose to be present. When you tidy your space, you are tidying your presence. You are gathering fragments of yourself scattered by earlier pains. Pain makes us break into many pieces, but order allows those pieces to return to a shape that resembles the heart you can still recognize. And the moment you look at the room that has brightened, you suddenly see a simple yet profound truth. Life does not ask you to be perfect. It only asks you to be awake. And cleaning, in this moment, is not an act of reaching perfection. It is the journey back to presence. A presence not dragged by the past, not threatened by the future, but simply standing in this exact moment. You begin to understand. Order is a reminder that you have a life to live, a being to preserve, a self to return to. When you look at the silent walls, you no longer see emptiness. You see a space in which you have been in conversation with yourself, a space holding the traces of recovery. Each position you rearrange is a thought clarified. Each empty space you create is a breath opened inside your heart. And then you realize, everything in this world holds metaphorical meaning if you slow down enough to see it. The chair placed straight is a symbol of the balance you're regaining. The bright window is a symbol of hope opening again. The clean floor is a symbol of a past gently washed away. Even the silence of the room is merely the echo of the stillness blossoming inside you. Order is how you tell your story without speaking, how you face the world without drowning in it, how you reclaim your essence after days of losing yourself. Your heart feels full, not with joy, but with clarity. A clarity that tells you that you do not need to chase anyone, do not need to strain to prove anything. You only need to live at the rhythm your heart can bear. And if a tidy room is the rhythm you need to begin, then that is the most human gift you can offer yourself. You are not merely cleaning your home, you are redefining your own existence. You are learning to stand firm in a world that never stops trembling. You are finding your essence again, the essence that knows how to love, to care, to hold itself without waiting for anyone else to do it. And the moment you take a long breath in the quiet room, you understand something small yet profound. External order is simply the doorway into internal order. And internal order is the sign that you have returned. Not to life, but to yourself. Peace, then, is no longer something to search for. It is something that appears on its own when you walk slowly, truthfully through the journey of rearranging your world, both outside and within. When the room is tidy, the mind is calm, not because it's clean, but because you can breathe again. There is a very small but precious moment that appears right after you finish cleaning. The room becomes still, no more rustling, no more objects waiting to be arranged, no more confusion hiding in the corners. Only silence remains, a silence that doesn't evoke fear, that doesn't make you feel empty, but feels like the warmth of a late season afternoon, soft, mild, and enough for you to take a deep breath without hurting anywhere inside. That is when you understand. You did not clean to make it clean. You cleaned to breathe like someone who has finally set their luggage down after a long journey. To breathe like a heart that has finally found a slower rhythm after days of beating too fast. To breathe like a soul twisted tight by life that finally opens just enough to let a sliver of light in. This space, this simple space you are standing in, strangely becomes the place where you can see yourself most clearly. Not the version that strives, not the strong version, not the version everyone expects you to be, but you, in your most primal state, a human being who just needs a quiet place to set their heart down. Some people think cleaning makes the house look nicer, but you know well it makes you softer, because the order outside is only the frame. The serenity within you is the content. When you glance around the room for the last time, you don't just see objects in the right places, you see a part of yourself finally returning to its rightful place. Life is full of places where you don't belong, roles you never wanted to play, words you had to swallow, emotions you had to hide so you wouldn't become a burden. But here in this tidy room, you don't need those roles anymore. You are allowed to be someone who has just gone through a storm. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to breathe without lying to yourself that you're fine. Philosophical serenity does not come from the absence of chaos. It comes from knowing you still have a place to return to after chaos. Cleaning does not make life easier, but it makes you light enough to walk just a little farther. And sometimes, that little bit is everything. You sit down, or lean gently against the door frame, and feel the empty space you just created begin to open inside you. Not the emptiness of loss, but the emptiness of life. A place to lay your worries down, a place to breathe, a place to begin again. That is the quiet miracle of tidiness. It does not erase the past. It does not resolve the pain, but it creates a pause, a gentle pause that lets you face all of it without trembling. You are not running anymore. You are not resisting. You are simply watching. And when you dare to watch, you begin to understand. This tidy room reminds you that peace isn't something that falls from the sky. It is something you create with your own trembling hands as you gather the pieces of your life. And at this moment, you see a beautiful truth that is easy to forget. You deserve that peace. Not because you are capable, not because you are perfect, not because you know how to arrange things, but because you are human, and every human has a soft part that needs to be laid down somewhere quiet. This room is merely a metaphor for that truth, a reminder that you have the right to pause, the right to breathe slowly, the right to not be okay and still be gentle with yourself. You do not need to turn yourself into a mountain to prove your strength. You only need to return to the rhythm your heart can bear, and sometimes that rhythm begins with a tidy room. Then you slowly realize, this tidiness does not take the shape of objects. It takes the shape of clarity, a clarity that doesn't blind, doesn't force you to understand everything at once, but resembles morning light falling onto the floor, slow, soft, and very real. And in that light, you see something you haven't been still enough to see in a long time. You have never lost hope. Hope was only buried under days where you couldn't breathe. Now you are breathing. You are returning. Not to the room, but to yourself. You touch the edge of the table, the corner of the bed, the door frame. Every place you touch carries the warmth of a small journey. A journey where you did not abandon yourself, even when life seemed determined to do it for you. And then you understand, This room is not to show off, not to prove that you are doing well, not to earn praise for being tidy. This room is proof that you chose gentleness over chaos, that you chose to stand back up, that you chose to tend to your own small world so you wouldn't collapse. This is the philosophy of serenity, not clean, but calm, not orderly, but luminous, not perfect, but light. You exhale one last time, and in that breath, you hear something you haven't heard in a long time. A tiny note of peace, very small, but enough for you to know that there is still a path ahead.